Hello and welcome to Psyched, the show where we explore psychedelics through social, economic, and political perspectives.
We have Courtney. Courtney, the AfterLife Coach, is a traditionally trained Ayahuasquera and plant medicine guide with 15 years of training, as well as a vocal advocate for all sacred psychedelic spaces. Kat is an experienced shamanic coach, helping seekers prepare for and integrate these powerful medicines. Kat also works with people confronting issues around death and shadow, and anyone looking to be more deeply connected to their souls. Her calling is to be a light as we walk through our darkness and to remind us that everything is always okay. Kat, thank you so much for joining us and welcome to Psyched.
Thank you so much for having me. It's good to be here. It's good to be here. Forgive the kind of sparse, interesting surroundings. I'm actually in the wilderness leading a master plant diet right now, like doing some deep dives with the plants. So I'm in a closet, but good enough, right? What I want to talk about today is what I feel like is the medicine of our times, which is a medicine I'm really honored to carry, ayahuasca. But there's a lot of myths and I feel like misunderstandings of how ayahuasca works with us to help us heal and to expand. So I kind of want to go deep into that. I don't have a presentation together because ayahuasca is my teacher in the space of fluidity. Anytime I try to have a plan that I put together that incorporates any aspect of her teachings, it always goes sideways anyway. So I've got some points I want to bring in. I'm just going to flow with this. First, I'll just give a little bit of background for anyone who doesn't know me and the way that I work, specifically that I come from a space of a lot of suffering and pain, just like anyone else. 15 years ago, I got called to go to the Amazon and to try ayahuasca for the first time. And at the time I was bulimic, I was alcoholic, I was diagnosed bipolar, I'd attempted suicide. I was very familiar with the dark side. And because the Western world in particular has a way of making those of us that have these kinds of challenges feel like we're broken, what ayahuasca did for me first when I went to the jungle to meet her is to give me the awareness that I wasn't broken. She actually gave me the hope and the perspective that I could feel better, which I know a lot of us that have had the journey of having addiction, having mental health issues, etc., we end up quite often feeling broken and hopeless, that the best that we can get is potentially a pharmaceutical prescription and a sort of space of, well, it's not suicidal, but it's not great either. So my mission is to express to anyone who may be in that state of consciousness that there is hope. It is not an easy path to do this work of healing and expanding, but boy, is it worth it. The reason why I feel like ayahuasca in particular is such the perfect medicine for our times is it's pretty undeniable that we are in a space of shadow work as a culture. So first, let me define what I mean by shadow work. It's an expression that we use a lot, but that has different potential meanings. What I mean when I say it is I'm a student of Carl Jung and the godfathers and godmothers of this psychology, understanding essentially that shadow is anything we've been working with unconsciously. So I love the expression of shadow because we all have one that follows us. And it doesn't matter how expanded, how enlightened you become, you can't get rid of that shadow because there's always more to know. Consciousness is infinite. And as we expand, so does consciousness. So we always, always, always have a shadow. Shadow is very clearly experiences with anger and fear, resistance, all of these emotions, depression that we classify as shadow is extremely valid. But so is what Jung called the golden shadow, which is all of our untapped potentiality. So shadow also involves the parts of ourselves that we just haven't like expanded into yet. because we haven't had the divine timing, essentially. So please know that when I say things are shadowy, I don't necessarily mean they're bad. In fact, that's why I like the term shadow, is it doesn't hold a distinction of right or wrong or good and bad. It's just an experience. So ayahuasca, a lot of people call her a healer, that there's in fact, a lot of retreats, one that I worked for, that would advertise that she is a cure for things. And I have a deep, deep problem with that, because it's essentially not true. What ayahuasca does, and why she's so helpful for us, especially right now, is she expands our consciousness. Really, truly, she's not a healer. In fact, I will go on record of saying I don't think healers exist, not in the way that we want them to. When we call something a healer, what I feel the vibration that we're bringing forth is we're saying, I want someone to fix me or something. So people come to ayahuasca, really all psychedelics, oftentimes with this request, and it's a very, very natural, normal human state to feel suffering, pain, physical pain, emotional trauma, and to want it to go away, essentially. That is not the path of healing. The path of healing is integration. I love that I'm on the heels of Tyler's beautiful presentation around the importance of integration, because that's what I'm really dedicated to as well, in addition to working with the medicines, because integration means wholeness. It does not mean a cure. So to go to any psychedelics, ayahuasca included, with the desire of make this go away from me, you're setting yourself up for disappointment, because it just doesn't work that way. What ayahuasca does in particular is she expands our consciousness in a way that it gives us an opportunity to know more about why we are either sick or sad or stuck to begin with. So this is the heart of shadow work, is to take the power of our awareness and to shine it on aspects of ourselves that have previously been hidden. So I will use like a personal example to kind of illustrate this. I'll use bulimia. So I had a many, many year relationship with bulimia. On the surface, that is an addiction that appears to be about food, about the intake and output of food. That was my assumption, is that, and that's actually how I was labeled by the psychiatrist that I worked with many years ago, is that I had a dysfunctional relationship with food. Okay, this was a true statement, but there was a much deeper truth beneath that. But I stayed fixated on this idea that the problem was the food. The problem was that I had no self-control. All of those things were just the symptom of a deeper problem. And I was very much in the throes of bulimia when I drank ayahuasca the first time 15 years ago. And one of the first things I realized about it is kind of common knowledge now about eating disorders, that it really wasn't about food specifically. There's reasons why that manifested as my addiction, but it was more about the aspect of control. Deeper than that, my relationship with anxiety, with being out of control, with not trusting the universe, not trusting myself. And even deeper than that, the notion that there was anything to control at all, So I drank ayahuasca many times, by the way. It took me, I chose bulimia as the personal example because this is the one that took me years to unravel. And it was one of the two things that I went to the medicine with request for assistance that was most painful. And so the bulimia example illustrates the process that I had to do the work of unveiling the shadow in me that had this propensity to use food in a controlling and an addictive space. And there's even more to it than that. I mean, the karma associated with doing any act out of destruction, which of course, bulimia is not something that we do out of self-love. So, but my mind, my ego wanted to desperately believe that I was getting away with the process of binging and purging and not having to pay any, at least instantaneous karma. But of course, as the years progress, that starts to add up. But ayahuasca has a way of amplifying your awareness of your true motivations. So in the throes of working with a medicine like her, there is no place to hide. There's an experience that happens where it feels like a 30,000 foot view. It's very much like I feel sometimes when I'm in an airplane and I'm looking down, and the world makes more sense because you can see the grids of the farms, the street systems. Everything just seems like it has a place. You can see the organization of it. Ayahuasca can do this with our own personal process. She expands us into this view of like, oh, okay, so that's what I'm working with in this compulsive behavior of control. For me, she just helped me to get back to the core traumas that occurred in childhood that made me feel unsafe in my body. Because it became a very strong awareness that the relationship with my body was really what I was healing, and with anxiety, which is kind of this core primal thing that most of us work with. So that gets me to bringing it into our modern times of why I feel like ayahuasca is so perfect for right now, is we are essentially in what I feel is an elongated ayahuasca ceremony, the intensity, the pressure cooker, all of these truths about our consciousness as a culture, especially in America, is right on the surface. They were always there, aspects of racism, misogyny, bigotry, just the issues that we have around hatred, which really reflects our discomfort of the diversity of consciousness and our a lack of ability at times to own our own shadow, because right now we're doing a lot of finger pointing and blaming. And really it's all a reflection of our own painful, traumatic relationships with ourselves that we are acting out with each other. So ayahuasca is such a powerful teacher for these times because she does the illumination that I'm speaking of, but she also teaches us to trust the discomfort. And this is the heart of shadow work. It's obviously not for the faint of heart, because the real work happens in whatever places within us that we least want to go. Yeah, that's why it's work. And that's why tools like ayahuasca, psychedelics in general, are so helpful, because they create a container, a set and setting that doesn't really allow us to hide or be distracted by all the many things that we typically distract ourselves with: sex and food and alcohol and media and social media and interpersonal relationships, et cetera, et cetera. So when you're with something like ayahuasca and you're backed into a corner and she goes to the place, I like to tease that eventually, if you're lucky, she'll go to the place that says, "Do not look here." And she'll flip that open with a lot of joy, because that's where the magic happens. And here we are as a culture having this experience, really, really facing the incredible discomfort of the truth of how we're showing up for each other and for ourselves, and the systems that we've been relying upon that aren't working for us. And it's pervasive in terms of really being confronted with the fact that there's just so much that needs to be healed, so much pain that's up on the surface. Well, ayahuasca, 15 years of working with her, she's taught me to trust this. I have my human side that's been really kind of tossed around like everyone else with the intensity of these times. But the truth of it is, most of me is just grinning and like, thank God this is happening. We're finally getting to the truth of things, because we cannot heal, integrate anything that is still hidden in the shadows. The most integral property that we can bring to our shadow work is integrity. If we want to know the truth about consciousness, we have to know the truth about what we're carrying. So personal integrity of owning our shadow, as a woman, I'm working with really owning the fact that I have a lot of anger. I have a lot of fire. And my society has told me that it's not okay to be a fiery, angry woman. And so I'm working with that in the context of recognizing I used to hide from that, and now I'm not. Now I'm open of like, yeah, this is what I'm working with. And of course, what's happened is my anger has dissipated from the radical permission. So this is ayahuasca's message, is we can hold the vision for what we would like to feel and be in a healed state and as a culture, but we're not going to get there unless we get really uncomfortable and have the willingness to feel and process the reality of the wounds of our lineage and the wounds of our lives, because they don't heal by thinking about them. They heal by feeling them. by bringing the light of awareness and integrity to them. And I see that happening so pervasively now in our culture. So even though, the media wants to tell us it's all bad news, it isn't. I love expressions like it's always darkest before the light, because it's very true. And in working with, psychedelics in general, especially ayahuasca, they are not comfortable. They're so confronting to these shadow aspects that I'm speaking of, and also on a physical level. Ayahuasca, all of us who have worked with her, we know that purging is a very common aspect of the medicine. It's not guaranteed, but it's wonderful when it happens because it's a movement of energy. And what she teaches in that purging, and by the way, the purging can be vomiting. It can also be yawning, crying, sweating, like any movement of energy. Sure, her symbol is often a snake, and she has this like very Kundalini-esque way of working with us, and it's very uncomfortable at times, in all ways, emotionally and physically and mentally and spiritually. It's just like this massive pressure cooker. But her invitation is to just breathe and trust the process, and to know that there's a breakdown that always precipitates a breakthrough. And so we are in a breakdown of our culture, but I much prefer this intensity myself, not just because I drink ayahuasca, but because I know that this is closer to the breakthrough of being in a better world than it is when we are in denial of the truth of our culture. So just a few weeks ago, we were more in denial about the reality of our racist tendencies, of the systems that are rigged for some people more than others. And wherever you land on the politics of all of this, it's very clear that as a culture, we are wounded. The only way we can heal that is by acknowledging it and feeling it. And this is the heart of the medicine of ayahuasca. She is not a healer. We heal ourselves. Nobody does it for us. I don't hold that there's any such thing as a healer. I am a practitioner and a facilitator with this medicine. I don't heal anybody. I create a space where they and the medicine and me as the container holder can create the magic of having a breakthrough. But I don't do it. We do it for ourselves. And that's why I feel like we are in a global ayahuasca ceremony right now, because the invitation in this intensity is to do the shadow work. And many of us feel that same level of intensity as we can't hide anymore from the wounds that we've been carrying collectively and individually. Good, hiding sucks. Hiding is the space that perpetuates the pain, because it creates a resistance to the emotions that we're carrying. And resistance creates conflict. Conflict creates suffering. That is the recipe for suffering. The moment we become spacious and say, okay, I'm carrying this. This is my truth. We've literally stepped out of the space of suffering. We've given it the opportunity to expand and to know something bigger. That is what ayahuasca teaches, is she'll push and push and push until we finally let go and stop pushing back. And that's the magical space of surrender, where we finally just own. Like ayahuasca has an expression she has said to me, and I really love it, that there is a Hitler and a Mother Teresa in all of us. We are all equal representations of the entire spectrum of medicine, or of consciousness rather. So because of that, the more that we deny the aspect of our shadow that holds the energy of Hitler, the more we give it power back to the recipe of conflict and suffering. So if we're in denial of that, of like, no, I'm all light and love, I never buy that when people say that, because it's not possible. Consciousness is not all light and love. We are all representations of that. So all of us contain the full spectrum. So the more that we acknowledge that, the more, we can sit down and have tea with our darkness, the less power it has. And the more we can actually embody the goodness and the love and the support and the beauty that we all desire on a soul level to walk in. So I just wanted to have this beautiful discussion about the medicine of duality, which is what I call ayahuasca, and why she is so integral to many of us anyway, in helping to trust the process of the world that we're living in, and to expedite it, to work with it in a way where we're saying, yes, come on, intensity, let's do this, let's expand, let's get to our breakthrough. Because when we continue to deny it and fight with it, we're just expanding it. And the last thing I'll say is if any of this resonates, if you're working through any existential crisis, if you're working through any integration of a peak experience or psychedelics, my company, AfterLife Coaching, helps in that realm too. This is kind of my passion of helping people that, especially those that were like me, that felt like the disconnectedness from the world, the systems that don't serve them meant that they would always be in a space of suffering, and it's not true. And right now, because of COVID, because of everything, we don't really, most of us have access to ceremonies in the way that we did just a few months ago. But the thing is, we're in a global one. So the same kind of things that happens in an ayahuasca ceremony are happening right now. So it is a beautiful time to reach out for support with people that work with these kinds of energies in a kind of a yes fashion. And so if you're interested in working with me, you can find me at afterlife.coach. My email address is kat@afterlife.coach. I'm all over social media with the same moniker, talking about these things. And it would just be an honor to work with anyone who feels like they need some help moving from the darkness to the light, doing some good old-fashioned shadow work.
Beautiful, Kat. Thank you so much. Really appreciate it. Let me get into some light because it looks like I'm in my own shadow right now.
Perfect.
So I'd love to start off with an audience question. We have a really great one. It is, I'm a newly trained psychotherapist who reveres Aya for aiding in their evolution. How do I honor the lineage of this plant, yet follow my passion of integrating this technology into my transpersonal and transcendental psychotherapy sessions?
I love this question so much, and I so deeply appreciate the humility of someone who has these superhero powers, but recognizes that the indigenous spaces have wisdom too. So a lot of the people with, PhDs, psychiatry, et cetera, come to me without that reverence. And so I deeply appreciate it because I have a tremendous reverence for that path. My answer is kind of simple, is in order to really understand and be able to merge the two, you need a lot of experience with the medicine itself, preferably in the Peruvian or indigenous settings. Even I, as a practitioner, I am not a Peruvian maestra. So people that really want to know the vibration of the indigenous tribes that have kept this tradition alive, I got to send them to Peru. Because you got to go to the source, you got to go to the medicine's home. And when people ask me what should I do to really embody being specifically an ayahuasca integration coach, it's like, you got to drink her. You got to have a deep relationship with this medicine. It cannot be taught. I personally don't resonate with the training courses that westernize the indigenous medicine in this way. It's like, you have this beautiful foundation as a psychiatrist or a therapist, then go spend some time in the jungle or with this medicine and combine the two disciplines. You can't learn this one in a classroom.
Beautiful. You mentioned one word in your answer, vibration, and I've only been able to sit for one ceremony in Peru, and one of the things that really came up for me was actually a much more physical experience than one that was visual. And I was wondering if you could speak to ayahuasca's ability to heal or bring about issues of the body, maybe even more so than the mind.
Yeah, that's beautiful. Okay, so first of all, I want to address the fact that, you had something that was more physical rather than visual, which a lot of people, when we hear ayahuasca, we expect it to be this big light show, and it's often not. The thing that we least expect it to be is how she typically manifests. So usually, if we have these intentions that involve, everybody wants clarity on their path, everybody wants to know more about consciousness in themselves. But if there are blockages in our physical space that are preventing us from feeling and knowing that, that's where she goes first. Hence the purging, hence the fact that a lot of it is very physical in nature. So this is a very normal place that we start when we work with ayahuasca, is feeling it very physically uncomfortable. I noticed that after a handful of years of apprenticing, I very rarely purge now. The life still happens, stuff comes in, or the meal I had last week is still because I do that, but you have less and less to purge. You have less and less the blockages. The blockages are preventing us from knowing what is in there. One of my favorite intentions with her is, what am I pretending not to know? Because we got it all, but the
Yeah.
blockages would have to be removed to access it. So that's why those experiences that you're naming are very common with her, especially in the beginning.
Beautiful. Well, Kat, thank you so much for joining us. Thank you for your insights. We really, really appreciate it. And it looks like the flow was on your side and it all turned out beautifully. So thank you.
Thank you so much for having me. Much love.
Yeah, be well.